sweet spot where your content can help your company and yourself. Then there's no conflict of interest, right? Like that's the best spot, I think, if you're able to do that.
Welcome to the Seed Stage. I'm your host, Enzo, CEO at June. Every week, June and Point 9 invite the most inspiring product and growth leaders to share their practical advice on how to grow your SaaS. Whether this is a story behind a feature, a marketing framework, or a risky update made on the pricing, we're digging ideas you and your team can put in place next week. No fuzz, no BS. Enjoy the show. Hi, Shyvee, and welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Really great to have you here. And since the last time we bumped into each other in San Francisco.
Yeah, I think time flies, right? It was during the holiday. I think we caught up with each other. And thank you so much for having me on the podcast. And it's like a dream come true at a small scale.
I'm the one being honored to have you here. I think you have a lot to share and you're very special kind of person in a good way. So I can't wait to hear your story.
No, thank you. Let's dive in.
So a few words about yourself. You're currently a product lead at LinkedIn, and you're also an instructor at LinkedIn Learning, where you feature some of the guests from, CPOs and kind of co-founders from the top Silicon Valley startups. You have a lot of great episodes. I recommend people to watch them. You're also a content creator on LinkedIn. You're pretty big. I think you're over 100,000 people now, which is very impressive. And your background ticks a lot of boxes. So I check your titles. You work in strategy, in technology, as a researcher, as a consultant, as a mentor, as a coach, and you're also a former entrepreneur. So that's a lot. And you even found the time recently to co-author a book called Reimagine, Building Products with Generative AI, which is one of the first, if not the first book on how to integrate Gen AI into product strategy and product development and product careers, basically. Right? Is it the first one? Do you know that?
I hope. I mean, I've seen some other AI book out there, but not so much on generative AI. So hopefully, it's a labor of love that, started this conversation. So I hope folks can check it out and let me know what you think. It's definitely not like an authoritative stand of like, this is the right way of doing things, but more like, here are the different school of thoughts. Here are the different theories and frameworks. Which one does it work for you? We included a lot of case studies as well to kind of illustrate early thinkers in that space, but really hoping to hear more from the community on feedbacks and their real life insights and working in some of those applications.
Yeah, we're going to touch. I also want to read that book. I told you yesterday it's out of order in some European countries, so I couldn't order it.
Aww.
I hope
ebook will work on Amazon. That's my hope. But let's check afterwards as well. My dream is like by listed on Amazon, like everybody should have access, at least the Kindle version. So let's see where things fell short. Yeah.
I'm an old school person. I like the paper version. We're going to touch, people should stay with us. We're going to touch on this AI book on the second half of the podcast. Just to crack on, you are a very inspired person. Your content creation game is very, very strong. I wanted to ask as some sort of early question, how do you find inspiration these days? Is it, how do you get that energy? And do you have any favorite source or hobbies for that?
Yeah, it's interesting. Thank you so much. So a bit of background. I started creating content probably around the end of 2021. So it's been like a little over 2 years now. And even within those 2 years, I would say the journey changed, right? Like what inspired me at the beginning is actually very different from what inspired me now. So when I first started, we can touch upon some of that to help people if they wanted to start creating content and building a brand and thought leadership on LinkedIn. I think at the very beginning, it was more coming from, I am always been motivated by sharing knowledge and, helping others. So at the beginning, it was a lot of my content were powered by my own experience, my own reflection, my own transition from, you mentioned a little bit about all of my different experiences and eventually getting into a product role. So I consider myself in many ways by Silicon Valley standard, probably not by the world standard, because I've been doing product for a long time, just without the title. But within Silicon Valley, there's quite a bit of, especially in big tech companies, prestige tech companies, I think there's quite a bit of like requirement that you need to meet to like be like a real product manager, right? Like there's a lot of program managers, product strategy lead, but they're not like true R&D product managers. So for me to like join those team, the world-class product team, it was quite a transition, right? From both like prepping for the interview, getting into the product mindset, the craftsmanship, working with the eng team, the design team, doing the right thing, not being like a feature factory. And so there was a lot of reflection, a lot of talking to people, a lot of like self-thinking, do I want to take that path, when I was being put on a path to be a people manager in an operations and research team, for example. So there was a lot of internal sort of growth and reflection, and then like obviously tips about how to get product, like how to update your resume, right? Like the practical skills. So I think I started out sharing my journey that way. I posted this like 100-day challenge where every day I drop a tip about this whole transition journey. So I think it sort of instantly found product market fit, or should I say content audience fit, right, on LinkedIn, because people on LinkedIn are looking for career advice. Product is a pretty popular job. So back then in 2021, 2022, I think a lot of people are looking for that kind of content. So when I was consistently producing it, I think a lot of people, learn a lot from it. And that's how I first got started. And so then midway through 2022 was when I decided, okay, I'm on a different trajectory now. So instead of like trying to pivot into product, I'm trying to grow within product, right? So my content started shifting more towards like, how do you level up? What's the right way of doing product? What do I learn? So in those scenarios, I think I learned a lot from consuming a lot of content out there, right? From other creators. I know like Akash, Elena Verna have posted a lot of good content. And then, and you mentioned a little bit about all the interviews I did with all the CPOs, right? Like the product management learning series was really sort of my a cornerstone of my creator journey of like pivoting from sharing my own experience to elevating others and others' voice and learning from them. So that's sort of the second phase of my creation journey, and where I find joy from reading from others, interviewing others, and sharing what I learn. And then the third phase, I think, came last year when generative AI became such a popular topic and how it impacts product. And I know that in a bit, you might touch upon this, is like, it's not always easy to manage a 9 to 5. And especially working in product, it's not strictly a 9 to 5 job, because you are the connective tissue, right? Like you're the one, if things fell short, like it's on you that things don't go as well. So it's never a 9 to 5. It's almost like you're always thinking about it. It's like you're like a founder in that sense of like thinking about, well, what's wrong with my product? How do I get it better? Why is that metric not moving when we ramp this feature? So I think last year, a lot of it was driven by curiosity and inward looking, meaning like I didn't have enough time like I was before. For 2 years that I was able to post almost daily. And then last year I switched more to like a weekly cadence, and then looking more inwards around like, actually, where do I find joy as I follow my curiosity to learn more about generative AI? So I do read a lot of newsletters coming from different sources, and then books, and then try to like find the balance between input, meaning like I'm consuming a lot of books, and then output, like sharing what I learn. So I think everybody's journey is probably going to be a little bit different. I encourage people to discover themselves, and then also acknowledging that you're going to evolve and your system's going to evolve. Just like any product you build, right? You go through different phases, and it's not going to be like a static one that lasts forever. So just in the past 2 years, I told you that I went through 3 phases of evolution. And I think right now I'm kind of like in between the third and the fourth phase to find like the next wave of inspirations.
And this is, you touched on a lot of great things. This is something that people don't realize when with creating content, is that actually the person creating content is also getting value, is learning something, right? Because every time you went through different phases, you had to master the topic, right?
I think actually the consuming part, or like a lot of people said like writing is the best way to sort of clarify your thinking. I think that's the best way to actually, share out. So I do think there's the give and take and the benefit to both sides.
So would you say you have used that personally as a way to, foster your learnings, or like to force yourself to learn something, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's a great, like every week I try to force myself to read at least a couple pieces of like long piece, like deep in-depth articles, and then try to figure out how to share it. I do know that there's one trade-off from time to time that I, just like any normal human being, sometimes you struggle with that. It's like the type of content I consume. Sometimes that I might or might not be popular when you post it on LinkedIn because there's, people like to chase certain type of content more versus the in-depth, not everybody's like at the same starting point thinking about the same mind space. So I encourage people to follow what interests you, like kind of your passion, because the intrinsic motivation is going to be the long-lasting soul for how you will drive you to continue to show up and posting content. Right. If you're chasing mostly based on likes and engagement, you might not last forever. And depending on your goals, right? Like some people maybe have their own consultancy or coaching businesses and they want to channel client that way. So they take like a more short-term view. But for me, I feel like the better join, like to avoid burnout, is to focus on things that gives you joy, or take your even content creation, just like any product, as a portfolio idea, meaning that let's say if you post 2 or 3 times a week, maybe one post is mostly driving engagement, meaning that the content might be a little shallow or for virality, right? Like for likes, for engagement, for influence, social influence. But then the other part of it is maybe 1 or 2 more posts is like your thought leadership, deep thinking. Maybe it doesn't go as viral, but it does showcase like a quality over quantity. So you can find that balance sometimes by taking sort of a portfolio approach to say, okay, of the 10 posts that I post, how many I want to optimize for virality and social sharing, how many I want to optimize for thought leadership.
I love that. And I think you touch on something very important here. You mentioned joy, right? And so in your first phase, or maybe your 2 first phases, you were, I think, exponentially growing your leadership and visibility on the platform. In your last phase, the current one, you're more into your thought leadership maybe, and your interest into personal interest into AI and developing that interest. You also started to post less, as you said, and that makes you happier. How do you think about the relationship between creating content versus having the 9-to-5 job? Is there a tension between being a content creator and, having expertise at your job? Do they come together? Is there a limit maybe?
Yeah, that's a great question. I gone through a lot of it, or like reflection on that, because what happened was early last year, I remember a lot more people start creating content for a lot of reasons on LinkedIn, right? First, more people got laid off, so they have like more time and they need to like build that presence to attract opportunities, right? LinkedIn is kind of like what I call a lead magnet, because when people get to know you, they're the right people, like recruiters or buyers or company executives. So a lot more people start creating content. Second is that Gen AI came out and there are a lot of tools around, hey, find the most popular post. And then with one click, like say, write something similar to this, but not quite the same. So then the cost of creating content, a lot of content, just gets like so much easier, right? Like you like fit in a prompt, here's an example pose, and like do something similar. And then you also start to see like some creators being impacted, let's say by layoff, so that they have like channel more creative energy to do more stuff. So there's definitely a tension there, at the beginning of last year. And then I think with a lot of tech companies laying off people, tightening their budget, tightening their belts, putting more pressure on like product leads to grow and deliver. Last year, for the most part, I was dancing with this identity loss of like, okay, I built this habit of like writing every weekend to put up like a 5 weekly, like a daily post, right? And then now I don't really have time because I work hard during the week and then I feel exhausted, even for doing something that I find joyful at the weekend of writing content could be a lot. So I think it really depends on the person. But again, I want to come back to what is the bigger why? Like start with why, right? Like what is the fundamental drive for you to put out content? Like you need to be very clear on that and the purpose that it leads. So if your dream, let's say, is to start this side hustle, and you knew that that's eventually what you want to get to, then maybe, even if there's a conflict, you might want to do that. Some people like me, I'm just purely more focusing on playing the long game. Like when I first started, I knew it's going to be a long game. I knew that what gives me money right now, like if I go out and found like a Maven class on how to interview for PM jobs, I feel like I could make like pretty decent money. But I also feel like I wouldn't want to do that for the rest of my life. Like I would like to level up and continue to grow. And then I wouldn't have time to be able to balance both, like founding this cohort, for example, that could make money near term, but then that would tax my bandwidth to learn and grow. And so I make that trade-off like intentionally. So I think it really depends. And some people create content to connect with like other leaders or find new opportunity. I think if you find it drainful to create content, then don't like think about other ways that you can connect. Focus on the why, like what gives you joy. And sometimes you don't always know. So you should like try it a little bit. And then you focus on quality over quantity, because I do think that there's some truth to once you get a certain number of followers, for example, you can pivot to choose different format, but until you get there, maybe you need to, keep up with the consistent posting. But it really depends again on like your goal, who you're wanting to reach, what you want to do. So I think the tension, it really depends on what you try to do, right? Like if you're still trying to grow as an operator, then you should prioritize your day job and then find time when you can do your side hustle. But if your goal is like in 2 years, you want to have your own business, then you have to make that trade-off like consciously. But again, like I'm the type that I like to show up strong for my team. Like I'm not good with like multitasking in that regard. I knew some other people are really good. So I think it's also personal in how much you want to trade off and where you find time, what your end goal is.
Lovely response. Yeah, because you said you could live maybe out of your content creation, but you love your job, you love your team, and you want to be there and show up, as you said. And then you mentioned Akash, right? And Akash, if I'm not mistaken, left currently his last job, to actually try the full-time content creator format. So I think at the end you're very right. It's about like your motivation, this midterm trajectory you have. And this is just a tool to, move you forward that direction, I guess.
Yeah, I think I couldn't emphasize more that the intrinsic motivation is very important. So really know what's your priority, what you're trying to get to. Sometimes you don't know until you test it and experiment with it. So try to like take small steps and experiment. And then you feel like if you're like completely burnt out or like scared because you couldn't handle both, then you know like which side is pulling you more, right? Are you more risk averse and your day job is like your priority, or you're like more like, hey, I'm seeing traction on this, I enjoy doing this, that maybe you gain the confidence and take that leap of faith.
I love it. And maybe this is getting a bit more intimate, but let me try to shoot this one. Do you think there might be sometime a correlation between the two, like your public reputation on, for instance, social media can drive some of the internal, promotions or things like that? I mean, I'm not talking specifically about you. I know very little about your career at LinkedIn, but just, I wonder what's your vision on that?
I think it depends. So, for example, I think if let's say I'm trying to draw like any product manager is writing like a framework or like a 2x2 metrics, right? I think one is probably like the quality of your content and like the, how much you're sharing thought leadership. And the other is sort of like platform fit, meaning, for example, if you work at TikTok or Instagram and then you are creating a lot of content there, it's sort of dogfooding your own product and sort of helping to drive. And for me, like at the beginning of when I'm creating a lot of content, it was both helping me as an individual, but also like dogfooding the product. So it was kind of like a win-win-win in many regard. But as I moved to like different like it does create internal visibility and opportunities for me to take on different projects and different initiative. But I do get a lot of people, let's say if you don't work for any of this social network or content creation company and you work in, let's say in a traditional B2B SaaS company, and then you're creating a lot of content on LinkedIn, that could be a couple routes, right? Like one is your content are like thought leadership, let's say on B2B product-led growth, that maybe you're projecting yourself as a thought leader. Then that's helpful. But if your content is like a lot of random stuff, like a lot of stuff, then maybe you do want to grow your side hustle. I think that's like another, and it sometimes could create tension, but until you get to that point, right? Your management might be like what's going on. I get a lot of people reaching out to me and say their management don't necessarily support them sharing that much on, social media platform. So I do get that, especially right now in today's market environment, it's much more, I think, like, favor the employers, right? Like less the employees, because of all the tech downsizing. So there's a little bit of tension there. I would say, depending on the type of content you want to create and your goal, again, like, is it to build your own side hustle, or how can you position it as a win-win for both your company, like to share there, what you learn on the job without like, obviously any confidential information about the business, but like maybe white paper that your company publish and your take on it to help you build your thought leadership, to ease that concern of like, why are you posting so much? I think I would try to find that balance of like, how can you make it relevant to your job to help amplify the impact of your team and your job versus like, this is my job, this is what I'm posting, and then let that tension kind of dance. That's the main advice I think I would give people on how to find that balance and overcome that inertia, right? Like that inertia of like the boss kind of like judging you for posting on social media.
Yeah, and sometimes the opposite approach happens. I've seen startups where basically someone is posting, and then eventually that becomes an acquisition channel for the company, and then the company actually asks the person to do it more, right? So I guess there is a bit of everything.
Yeah, I think so. That's why I was like, find a sweet spot where your content can help your company and yourself. Then there's no conflict of interest, right? Like that's the best spot, I think, if you're able to do that.
I agree, yeah. And we've always had this, every company in the world asks eventually their employees to share stuff on social media to propagate some information. It's been, companies have done that forever, right? And now I think there is an opportunity maybe to share some more, fine-grained content or more subtle content, I guess, around that. You also wrote about this concept of growth loop and how to apply it to your career. Could you elaborate on how the concept, how it works, how people can leverage it? And does it have anything to do with social media or not?
Oh, absolutely. Because I think the concept of growth loop, for those, obviously, hopefully most of your listeners are familiar with the concept, but the idea is that how can you compound growth, right? So that one leads to bigger and like a snowball effect, sort of. So I think you can apply the same concept to building your career, assuming you are the product yourself, right? So how do you amplify the growth? I think creating content online and letting that be a lead magnet, like amplifying your impact, is definitely a cornerstone of that growth loop strategy. So a lot of times, traditionally, if we work at a company, I mean, the only way you really showcase your impact is your resume or your LinkedIn profile. But you don't really have an acquisition channel where people would come to your LinkedIn profile in an inbound way, right? You have to like reach out, you apply for a company, and that's how people know about you. But then, they still need references. They don't know how good you are. You said you good. When I think about career, growth loop is optionality. And then also optionality, meaning you have a lot of choice. Like I could be working for a startup or established company or advising or trying to coach myself or launch a course, eventually opening up all of those possibilities and position yourself to be able to capture those opportunities. And then the second is like, how do you get those opportunities to come to you, right? Versus you having to continuously mine and, find those opportunities. So having this online presence, I think really help to build that thought leadership for people to come to you. And that's what I mean by like growth loop, is to be able to, engineer serendipity and luck. I think another way to call it is like maximizing the surface of luck so that you are more likely to capture it. You're more likely to be able to, experience serendipitous moments.
So the loop is basically you give and you give and you give, and eventually it comes back, right? That's the loop.
Yeah. And then having sort of an online presence to kind of capture that, so that people can trace back to see, oh, okay, here's what you've done, and open up possibilities so that you don't feel stuck in like, I only have this one option, it's just my full-time job. And then if it doesn't go well, or in moments you get laid off, then you feel like you're completely a victim at the hands of your employer.
That makes a lot of sense. I love when product people apply product framework to their life, and that resonates a lot. One thing which is interesting about yourself is your appetite for productivity, personal productivity, and it can't be decoupled from the rest that we talk about, right? Like one of the reasons you're able to do your work and you were also able to create content is just by being, very aware of your time and how the days should be, executed. And you actually created also great content about that. So I wanted to touch on it. What are maybe one or two non-obvious strategies to use to maintain productivity and some sort of balance, in life?
Yeah, I can give maybe a quick two. One is there's this quote that really fundamentally changed me or how I see productivity, which was work expands to fill your time. What that means is that if you don't set a boundary of like, hey, I'm going to complete this in 30 minutes or something, you let it drain, it can take up 4 or 5 hours or however much time you give. So I think that the lessons learned that I take from there is that you should, set boundary of like, hey, what's the 80-20 rule? What can I get 80% of the quality and 20% of the time, right? So like set that, obviously get better at that because sometimes certain things take longer than you anticipate. And then I am sort of sometimes the culprit of that. Like I anticipate things that like I give myself 30 minutes, but maybe more realistically an hour, but get that like limit. So that you don't overspend more time on trying to perfect something that doesn't, need to be that perfect. So progress over perfection. The other thing I think a lot of people talk about is the Eisenhower prioritization metrics, right? Like really ask yourself based on urgency and importance, like how important is this? How urgent is this? So then every time just any task that came up, understand those two. Like if it's not urgent, not important, like just don't do it. Make peace. If it's not important but urgent, then try to do it as little time as possible, right? Or delegate. If it's important but not urgent, you really have to carve time to like make effort to do those. But again, layer on top of that other principle, right? What's the 80-20 rule? That will get you the most return. So I think those are pretty obvious or non-obvious, but are important rules when it comes to productivity.
They are both great. I knew the second one, but not the first one. So a lot of people know that they shouldn't do the stuff that are not important, but we all eventually do it. How do you really convince yourself? How do you create that rigor that, pushes you only to do these things? Because eventually they slip in, right? And we all know that. Do you have a way to approach that? An advice maybe here?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think doing a time audit, meaning like, doing a reflection either daily to set your intention of like, hey, here's the most 3 important goals, right, of today, this week. And then constantly check in. Are those goals changed? How far are you making progress on those goals? And then if any of these other like urgent but not important tasks is getting into the way, then And then the other good exercise is doing a ton audit. Like when I was trying to get ready for promoting this book, I think I did a lot of like urgent but not that important or tasks that I could outsource. And it drains my energy. So I like did it for a day and I was like, oh, wow, I spent all this time doing this task that I do not enjoy. It drains my energy. I don't have energy to do other stuff. And I could have just outsourced it. So then you force that sort of reflection moment of like, okay, these are the tasks that are low impact, low ROI. I really shouldn't do it next time. So then figure out ways to like delete it, delay it, or delegate it. So I think those checkpoints, whether it's setting the intention of what's important, as well as reflecting on how well am I achieving my, goal on those big rocks, the 3 big rocks I call in my course. And then if it's not serving you, what are you going to do next?
That's great. So these goals don't have to be purely financial, right? Like one of your goals could be joy, and that's why you're spending time with people just to pay it forward, is because that's how you achieve one of these goals, right? Love it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, for example, I enjoy cooking and it's a form of therapy for me. So I would make sure every Saturday night I get to carve out 3 hours to think about cooking what I want to cook and then getting ready, getting the ingredient, actually going into, cooking. So that's a priority for my Saturday, for example.
Oh, I love it. I can't wait to see the YouTube channel of Shyvee cooking. I would
I do
watch
have
it.
an Instagram that shows some of the things that I cook. It's called Shift Cooking here. I don't really market it, but it does have some of the galleries of photos of food that I cook in the past.
Oh, lovely. I'll make sure we point to it. Last category of
Thank you.
questions, and we'll try to wrap it up quickly. Your book, Reimagine. So you wrote it with two amazing people, Kathleen Kai, I think, and Dr. Yuen Wrong. I hope I got them well. I wanted to ask a few things around that. The first thing is the classic question you get on AI, general impact on product management. What do you think is going to be an actual change in the next 5 years?
Yeah. I mean, 5 years is a good time frame because it's giving it enough of a runway to really make a more significant challenge. So I think let's come back first and then I'll answer the 5 year goal. I think for the right now, AI is still really very much in a childhood playground phase. Like a lot of people get in, try to test the technology, but it's not quite mature for commercial application in a reliable way. I'm saying that mostly because a lot of times AI is unpredictable, right? Like you fit it a prompt and sometimes it outputs it well. There's a lack of user control, but that's rapidly changing through a lot more reasoning capabilities into the AI, as well as how we design the UI to give like real-time feedback, human in the loop to really guiding the AI to create important output. I think from a product management perspective, both from a user, let's say the product capability, I think AI is just going to be in every product going forward, like in 5 years. Today, actually, it's already in about 70-80% of products, but it's mostly under the hood, right? Like what product you get recommended on Amazon, on Netflix, the show that you watch, all of those are powered by AI, like Uber matching you with the riders. But it's just like not very obvious. Like people don't feel like, oh, this is like magic that happens.
Yeah.
And generative AI kind of put a face to it. So I think in the next 5 years, we're going to see a lot more AI embedded in every product. In some shape or form. There's human in the loop. So there's some sort of UX pattern for you to interact with AI, whether through prompt or just clicking on like a pre-generated prompts to guide you. You're able to provide feedback to have that real-time interaction. There's going to be a lot more modalities, meaning it's not just text, right? There's going to be images, audio files, short videos. A lot more people are going to unleash their creative energy, energy in that space. I think in terms of a business application, there will be a lot more like automation of little tasks, automation of workflows. There's going to be a lot more, knowledge based, like you'll be the judge of how the AI output and the AI actually doing a lot more of the work to generate the raw input. So you might not start ever from like a blank sheet of paper again. You might always start with like a 20% draft or something. And then you're like working to build up from there. I feel this the most when I was writing the book, right? Like the idea came about for writing this book actually came from a hacker house. There was one startup founder. There were mutual friends of Kaylin and me. And he had this idea of like helping people to write a book, using a prompt. And then you can give it a lot of the knowledge base and you auto generate an ally. So that was maybe like the 1% work that started the springboard of like, oh, we can use this thing to like eventually write a book. But obviously the ally wasn't that great yet, but it was good enough to get us energized and started. So I think there's going to be a lot more of that, like AI aiming you at the initial brainstorming, helping you research, fine tune, automating a lot of the mundane work and product management, like Jira ticket management, like a lot of that stuff. And then from a business application standpoint, I think there's going to be a lot more vertical integration into different space, right? Like in the legal space, we are already seeing Harvey, leading the charge of like helping to generate like different case files, doing research. I think we're going to see a lot more of that in just different vertical. I do think that what's exciting about this new future is that it's not just big tech company disrupting the industry. I think a lot more traditional, industry is going to step up and be able to leverage this technology to benefit them, like in the healthcare space, in legal, in human resource, a lot of this foundational industry. From a product trio, like engineering, product, and design, I think there's going to be a lot more overlap of the roles, meaning I've seen a lot of design tools, for example, with a prompt, you can actually get some high level mocks pretty much within like minutes of a prompt, right? So I think PMs will be more empowered to have like a visual storyboard format at your fingertips. And then your relationship as a PM and designer is going to evolve over that, because then how like design is going to give input on top of it and to iterate until you get to the final product. And obviously with a lot of more no code solution, I think PMs who do not know how to code or having limited technical knowledge is going to be empowered to kind of making some of those initial MVP no code prototype, right? And the iteration speed is going to be so much faster than waiting for a couple months to ship something. It could happen, overnight, or like in matters of days, and iterating and tweaking from there. So I think it's most exciting and very, it could sound very stressful to some people because the speed, the pace is going to be a lot faster. And yes, 2 days ago, I was talking to the head of product at Tome, who I interviewed and recorded that I will share in my PM learning series. So when he's building Tome, which is this AI presentation maker, he mentioned instead of working backwards, like most of what product management is thinking about the ideal state and then working backwards, a lot of times working with AI working forwards. Like, this technology and you have to kind of figure out, what problem should you deploy to best solve and leveraging this technology. So I think it's going to be a good dance between what is the problem you're trying to solve and then what can realistically this technology solve. And then in many, many ways. So those are some of quite a few themes that I highlighted, not in the most structured ways.
I think you opened a lot of doors, and that's a lot for people to think and go away with. It was perfect. And I also am very keen to see how the relation between the trio evolves. I think the hard skills are going to be less and less critical, as these tools will basically do more of the job. But it doesn't matter because PMing was never always about, the hard skills. So is design and so is coding. So you're right. Like, is there like a future where the engineer, the designer, and the PM are the same person?
Depending on the size of the company, right? If you're working at a very small startup, I think Gen AI really empowers you to be like this jack of all trades that you can work on a lot of different things. But I think in larger company, I think there's still going to be some level of division of labor. But the role just gets a little more blurry, right? With people taking on different responsibilities. I know, for example, in Airbnb, like last year, there was like this heated debate of like they abandoning the quote unquote product management function, but it just get morphed into a lot more of these other roles. And even my role currently at LinkedIn, I feel like I'm more like a general manager than purely looking at the product, because I look at go-to-market, sales, design, engineering. So it's like the skill set gets a little bit more well-rounded and multifaceted than just looking strictly at like product. You are basically at a permanent beta mode. I think it's where the career is going to face. It's like you're constantly learning new things, iterating and trying out to continue to disrupt yourself in some way as well.
That's a great conclusion. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Shyvee.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
Where should people follow up with you if they want to read your content? Is it LinkedIn?
Yeah, so I post it quite often on LinkedIn, so you can find me at Shyvee. Search that on LinkedIn, and then obviously the book is out there. It dives a lot deeper into like mental models that you should have when it comes to like building your product career in the Gen AI era, and a lot of the UI UX patterns that we're seeing, case studies. So you can also search on Amazon. I know that we have a very global audience, so sometimes I give a link and it doesn't actually go to the right market, but if you're open to looking ebook, I'm hoping most markets will be able to support that. And if you search by my name or by Reimagine, you should be able to find the book and give me feedback, right? Like write to me on LinkedIn, and we'd love to hear from many of you.
Amazing. I'll make sure to point to these 2 links. Thank you so much, Shyvee. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Seed Stage. The best way to support us is by leaving a 5-star review. The team is pushing hard to bring you the best stories and insights, and your feedback helps others discover our podcast too. So please, if you haven't done it, take a moment to leave us a review. This means a lot. Until the next episode, take care.